He might not be well positioned to become Ontario's next premier, but he may have a large say in who gets the job. Joining us now for more, Eric Hoskins, Ontario Liberal leadership candidate and the MPP for the riding of St. Paul's, in which this television station sits. And Dr. Hoskins, we're happy to have you back here at TVO.
I'm happy to be back.
Let's do our full disclosure thing off the top. I've got a 21-year-old son who's working for you.
So and he's doing a great job, I should say.
I'm neither happy nor sad to hear that. That's his business, but we just put that out there for full disclosure. Let's start here. We know that after the delegate selection weekend took place, you ended up in 6th place out of the 6 candidates. And you gave a speech at the Board of Trade the other day where you were pretty honest and candid about how things sit for your campaign right now. Having said that, there are superdelegates out there that still need to be pitched who are uncommitted. So I want to give you a shot. I'll ask you the same first question I've asked everybody, which is what particular skill set do you think you offer that would make you, in your view, the best of the 6 to become premier at this moment in our history?
Well, I think a variety of things, and I want to address the weekend, the delegate selection as well, and of course I had hoped that I would have come out of the weekend stronger, but as you mentioned, there are about 400 ex officio delegates that have a vote that are up for grabs. I've got a lot of support among them as well, and so I've committed to going forward to the convention and working as hard as I can in the next week or so to make sure that I have as strong a showing on that first ballot as possible. And so you never know in these conventions, especially with so many delegates, so I'm looking forward to continuing the race and seeing how that turns out. In terms of why I'm the best person for the job, I've often talked about how I've got experience in politics, 3 years in cabinet and 2 different cabinet portfolios, but I have a lot of experience outside of politics as well before getting into the political arena, and whether that's in healthcare as a doctor and a public health specialist, or the roughly decade that I spent working overseas as a medical doctor and an aid worker and primarily in war zones in Africa. So it's that experience that has not only given me a great appreciation for what we have here in Ontario and Canada, but it's given me, I think, a perspective on things where I'm able to listen well and connect with Ontarians in terms of what their priorities are and what's important to them, not just the challenges, but their hopes and aspirations.
In that speech at the Board of Trade the other day, you did say that if it can't be me, it should at least be somebody who will champion the ideas that I believe, the values that you believe. Give me an idea that you want whoever might win this thing to pick up.
Well, one of the, I'm going to give you 2. I mean, okay. One, and I'll talk more about the other. The social justice is very important to me, and for the last year before resigning my cabinet position in order to run in the leadership race, I was chair of the province's poverty reduction strategy. So I think Ontarians, doesn't matter what political stripe, or even if you don't see yourself having a political stripe, I think Ontarians generally have values where they want to continue to make progress in reducing the level of poverty in this province. That's important. The other issue that I've been talking a lot about is youth unemployment. So if you're over the age of 25, the unemployment rate in this province is about 5.9% right now. It's not bad. If you're under the age of 25, however, it's almost 1 in 5, almost 20% of our kids under the age of 25 aren't working, and that doesn't even include those who are working part-time or below their skill sets. So despite the fact that we have the best education system in the English-speaking world, we have the highest level of participation in post-secondary education, we seem to hit this wall and aren't able to provide the opportunities to those young people for those stable, well-paying, sustainable jobs. So I believe we need a youth employment strategy to tackle that head-on and make progress on that important issue.
Have any of the other candidates come to you and said, Eric, I'll champion those 2 issues if you come to me on the second ballot?
No. So, but many of them have come to me and said that I believe strongly in the same issues that you're bringing forward. And so in youth employment, I think, is a perfect example of that. I was the first to speak about it. Now all candidates are talking about the youth employment crisis in this province and what we need to do about it. And certainly on the social justice area side of things, there are a number of candidates, I think all candidates, frankly, because we're Liberals, that feel that that's an important priority for them as well. So, but I've been talking to all of the candidates. We've all been talking to each other. I think it's really important that we stay close during this process. There are 2 goals here. One is to choose the next leader of the party, but the other goal as well is to make sure we come out of this stronger as a party, united, energetic, with some bold new policy ideas that we can take forward.
Your campaign, as you've just pointed out, has focused more on the social justice side of things than, say, the deficit. The current Liberal government, though, under Dalton McGuinty's leadership, seems quite focused. I know critics would say not enough or not appropriately or whatever, but he certainly says his chief priority is getting that deficit down. Do you think your campaign hasn't taken off the way it should have because you've just not got the right message for the right time?
Well, I have been talking about the deficit, and I have indicated my commitment to eliminate the deficit by 2017, 2018.
But you're not associated with that issue.
Well, I've
not in the way
worked out,
some of the others are.
Perhaps. You know, I haven't sort of run out there declaring myself the jobs premier, for example, although I think all of the candidates have said that their top priority is to create jobs, strengthen the economy, and reduce and eventually eliminate the deficit, bring us back to balanced books. And I've spoken about that. I've talked about how we would do that in terms of a greater focus on research and innovation and commercialization of that research, entrepreneurship, supports to small and medium-sized businesses, which are 97% of the businesses in the province. But I've also given the economic argument for the social justice issues. I've shown the economic benefits if you can pull people out of poverty and turn them into contributors in their community and tax-paying citizens as well, so that they are actually contributing on the revenue side to the government's coffers. I've also talked about how you can find efficiencies within government as well to make sure that we're having greater impact with the funds that we have.
So the deficit, in your view, is still able to disappear by the year 2017-18.
Absolutely. We're ahead of schedule, in fact, and I think that that we have, as a party, we certainly have demonstrated that we're capable of reducing it in that timeline. I've set out that commitment, as I mentioned, as well. And I firmly believe that by working on both sides of the equation, the revenue side, of course, is important, and there's a lot that we need to do, continue to do in terms of job creation and strengthening the economy. But on the expenditure side, for example, you know, in healthcare, if we can shift the 15% of people that are in hospitals occupying those acute care beds, if we can shift them out into the community, either at home, ideally, or in other residential settings, we can save a lot of money doing that. It's better for these people and their families as well, but we can then reinvest that within healthcare to have a bigger impact.
That takes upfront investment, though.
Pardon me?
That takes upfront investment. That means spending more now to get a bigger payoff
later.
Well,
I think it takes the courage to continue that shift of resources in healthcare from curative to healthy living and prevention. We know that that pays off in terms of, often in the short term, certainly in the medium and long term. I think it's having the courage to make the decisions that we know need to be made, especially in healthcare where it's evidence-based. We know what we need to do. We just need to have the leadership and courage to do it.
Okay. You mentioned the revenue side of things has to change as well. Mm-hmm. Do we need to raise taxes in this province?
No, I don't believe that we do, but I also am not one that would advocate lowering them. I've talked about there's a myriad of tax credits and benefits that we provide. Some of them, I think that we are perhaps a little more generous than we need to be. So I give the example of the child tax credit for example, my son who takes swimming lessons. I don't think that I'm not using myself as an example here in terms of the income, but there are certain families where I think their income is sufficient that they don't need that $50 they get at the end of the year because the government is giving them that back for the swimming or skating lessons that they might
That's
enroll
a federal
their child.
thing, though, isn't it?
That's a provincial thing. Well, so I've advocated income testing for those sorts of tax credits and benefits. I think we need to look at the whole set of tax credits and benefits that we provide and make sure that we're actually having the impact that we're intending to have and that we're helping those people that really need it.
Let me ask you about the panel that Francis Lankin, the former head of the United Way in Greater Toronto, and Munir Sheikh, the former head of StatsCan, were tasked to put together. They came forward with some very far-reaching recommendations on how to reduce poverty. I haven't heard a great deal of it. You're probably the one candidate of any of them who's actually spent some time in this campaign talking a lot about this. Would you sign on to all of the recommendations they put forward for getting people out of poverty in the way that they've suggested?
Well, I've certainly said that I would sign on to the key recommendations of their report, and I think it's a seminal report. It's incredibly important. It's too bad that it hasn't got more attention. I think it probably partly got distracted by other things, including this campaign. But I've said that I endorse the key recommendations. I believe that it's important. There's sort of two sides, two parts to it, right? There's the consolidation of the many programs that and benefits that exist for those either on Ontario Works or ODSP for people living with disabilities. We need to streamline that and consolidate the benefits, make it sort of one-stop shopping so we can actually administer it more effectively and efficiently. And on the flip side as well, they talk a lot about, again, this is the economic argument for doing this. They talk about providing those individuals with work opportunities. So
and a bump in compensation.
And a bump in compensation.
Which means you'd have to find another, I don't know what it was, $200 million or something like that up front?
Well, they have a proposal within the report that allows that to be, those funds to be found within existing programs. So that isn't a case of having to find new money. It's again, it gets back to evidence-based and allocating the resources, the funds where you know they're going to have maximum impact.
Here's something you said at that Board of Trade speech back on January 15th. You said, "I am in this race to effect change, to help this province achieve its potential to be a progressive voice at a time of political disengagement and disillusionment." And I want to pick up on that last word. What is the one thing in politics today that you think makes it so disillusioning, in particular for young people to be involved in?
Well, I think what's most important is that we speak as politicians and as a government and as legislatures. We need to make sure that we're speaking to issues that resonate with Ontarians. And sometimes there's a demographic component to that, where there are certain issues that are most important to a younger demographic or perhaps a senior demographic. Some of it's geographic as well. You know, I've spent most of this campaign in rural and northern Ontario as well, talking to people. So one of the things that I believe is really important in terms of addressing that issue of disconnection and perhaps disillusionment, as I referenced in my speech, is to make sure that the issues that we're tackling, that we're dealing with, are genuinely ones that we've heard about. We're taking the good ideas that are out there from Ontarians, from our constituents, and trying to make a dent on some of those issues. And again, it's not just the challenges that are before us, it's also the opportunities, people's hopes and aspirations. And so again, meeting with literally thousands of people over the last couple of months throughout Ontario and the far reaches of this great province. And as a doctor, you know, I think I'd like to believe I'm a good listener as well over more than 2 decades of practicing medicine. That's one thing that being a good physician teaches you. So I've listened a lot, and what I've heard is that Ontarians are very anxious for us, for all politicians, not simply the Liberal Party, to do a better job at connecting and listening and consulting and making sure that we're treating everybody with respect and dignity.
I want to pick up on that, particularly as it relates to rural Ontario. Where are you from originally?
From the town of Simcoe, proudly. It used to be known as Bird Town, actually, until John Graves Simcoe overnighted in the local park, and they decided, perhaps appropriately, to change the name to Simcoe.
Okay, and you ran once before, also in a rural riding, I think, did you not?
I actually ran in 2008 in Haldimand, Norfolk, which is my home area.
All right, in which case, even though you represent Yonge and Eglinton, you're actually not a bad guy to ask about what's gone on with your party in rural Ontario. What's happened to the relationship there?
Well, I think over time, you know, first of all, it's more. I believe it's more challenging for a party to effectively represent a part of this province when those parts don't have strong representation within that party. Now, ideally, that's through an elected official, but it's not as simple as that. It's also making sure that the Liberal membership, that's what we're talking about here, and the Liberal associations in these unheld or these rural northern ridings, that those are strong associations, that we support them as a party, and that they have a strong voice in the decision-making processes of the Liberal Party. So I think that that is a very important aspect of it. But a lot of it as well, it's not rocket science. You know, that even though I spent my first 18 years growing up in a small town, I farmed growing up. By the time I was 16, I was running an apple orchard. So it's not that we're different. It's just we live and exist in different sort of unique circumstances, where the challenges that we might face in the town of Simcoe, where I grew up on the shores of Lake Erie, those challenges might be different than in my riding of St. Paul's in downtown Toronto. So it's really being aware of that. It's making sure that we're reaching out and we're listening and we're hearing from people, and it's that issue of respect and dignity and making sure that the consultation process is strong. If we can do that, we can get those ridings back. If we actually, everything we do at Queen's Park, if we're talking about rural and small town Ontario, for example, that everything we do at Queen's Park from a legislative point of view or a policy point of view, a debate point of view, we need to look at that through a rural lens, through a small town lens, through a northern lens, through an urban lens, just to see how it's going to impact different people in different parts of the province.
And yet all the people running for the leadership right now are all from, most of you are from very big cities, namely Toronto or Mississauga, and even Sandra Pupatello, who says she's not Toronto, but she's from Windsor, which is a real city, obviously. So how does this party reach out and expect to represent rural Ontario when almost all the moxie seems to be coming from the big cities?
Well, I think it helps if you actually have lived experience like I do in rural and small town Ontario, but it's not a requirement. I think it's having that open mind and having that sensibility and working hard, being very deliberate in your leadership and making sure that you are taking into account the issues that are important to people that live in that part of Ontario. So it's not a difficult thing to do, and of course you need to surround yourself as well by people who are knowledgeable. And I think again the listening component of this and the consultation. And at the end of the day, it might sound overly simplistic. It's really about, that's why I called, it's about respect. That's why I called the first platform that I released Respect for Rural Ontario, because it's about respect and dignity, understanding, and making that effort.
In our last few minutes here, let's talk some politics. Can I tell you what I've been hearing about you out there?
Sure, just be gentle.
I'm hearing that on paper you're a terrific candidate. You're a doctor who saved lives. You're a guy who started War Child Canada. But you were way too green to be premier, and the thought that 3 years in politics was enough for you to win the top job was a miscalculation. What do you say to that?
Well, you know, I think I'd leave it to others to maybe if this is what you're suggesting, you're leaving it to others to sort of make their own decision. But I'll tell you this: that I firmly believe, and I've heard this regularly, that Ontarians are looking for someone who has experience in politics, but also experience outside of politics. I bring with me 25 years' experience as a family doctor and a public health specialist, an aid worker, a humanitarian. When you think that Ontario is probably the most diverse place in the world, maybe New York and London are comparable to a place like Toronto, for example. But the fact that I lived and worked overseas from many of the countries where we receive either refugees or newcomers, immigrant communities, that gives me, I think, a special level of insight in terms of some of the challenges that they face. So I think that experience inside and outside is important. I have to, you know, to be frank, you know, I was one of the last candidates to enter the race. I think I didn't sell as many of the memberships perhaps as the other campaigns did. I'm not as well known as the others, so I knew I had a big hill to climb. But I came into this race for two reasons. One was to be premier, to win the race, to be the leader of the party, and we'll see how things go going forward. And I'm realistic as well. I'm not. I understand what the challenges before me are. But at the same time, I was answering Dalton McGuinty's call for renewal of the party, and I took that very seriously, and I decided that I wanted to be inside this process, part of the renewal process, bringing forward bold new policy ideas and seeing how hopefully they would resonate with Ontarians and within the party. And also, you know, expressing what my vision for Ontario is. So it's been, that part of it as well, that renewal process has been equally important to me.
I don't expect you to tell us here, if you have to drop off on the first ballot, who you're going to go to. But I hope you'll tell us if you've decided yet who you're going to.
I will, and I haven't.
You have not decided yet?
I have not decided, and I'm not, you know, there's a third possibility, right, which is I think a very dignified one, and it respects the delegates who have come to the convention with me and supporting me, is the possibility of releasing my delegates and letting them decide one at a time who they feel that they should support.
Once upon a time in this province, you actually had to be a doctor to be health minister. For about the last 40 years, it's almost disqualified you from being health minister. But if one of the leading candidates came to you and said, Eric, how'd you like to be health minister in exchange for supporting me? Is that something that would turn you on?
Well, I mean, if you look at recent years, that's probably not necessarily the, it's a pretty challenging job in terms of being the minister responsible.
But you know it, you're a doc,
I know,
you've been inside
I know it. And in fact, a lot of my campaign, I've been talking about the importance of healthcare transformation, and I've got none of the other candidates have the experience. I've got 25 years experience in the policy arena and also in the front lines. Well, I look at, in terms of if I eventually do lend my support to another candidate, I look at it this way. It's a whole set of issues. And part of that is how I might be able to make the greatest difference going forward in terms of public service and the public good. But I also look at the integrity of the candidate. I look at their leadership skills. I look at if they're prepared, even if they are the smartest person in the room, that they're prepared to surround themselves by smart people and work very solidly as a member of a team.
So sharing your values would not be enough. You want to make sure that whoever you go to, if you do go to somebody, can win. Is that fair to say?
Well, I
That's
think...
W-I-N, not W-Y-N-N-E, just to be clear.
I think winnability is one more of those features, right? So we're up to 4 or 5, and I think sharing those values as well in terms of social justice and other issues is another one. So there's probably 5 or 6 of them, and I would say likely the least important is how it will impact me as an individual. But I've lived my whole life, I've never had a master plan, and this might seem rather naive or idealistic, but I just believe in helping others, and I've tried to find ways where incrementally I could have a bigger and bigger impact on influencing the public good.
Just in our last 30 seconds here, you got some really unusual support. Former prime ministers don't usually endorse, and yet John Turner endorsed you. Film directors don't usually endorse, you got Deepa Mehta. Superstar singers don't usually endorse, but you got Kanan. Former progressive conservative attorney generals don't usually endorse somebody in a different party, and yet you got Roy McMurtry.
Yes.
Why do you think all of that didn't translate into more?
Well, I don't, you know, it's difficult to, first of all, I'm very proud to have the endorsements of those individuals and others, and I think it speaks to sort of the breadth of the support that I do have. I know that I'm very proud of the team, my campaign team as well. We worked very hard and very successfully, so there's still a number of days to go. As you mentioned, the ex officios still need to be tapped into, and hopefully I can gain some more support from them. But at the end of the day, I went into the race to win, but I understand that you don't always have to win to make a difference. And so there are candidates in this race who have been at this. This is the culmination of a 20-year career for some of them. For me, I think it's just the beginning.
And we thank you for coming into TVO and sharing your views. And as I've said to all the candidates, good luck on the 26th at Maple Leaf Gardens.
Thanks, Steve.
That's Eric Hoskins, Ontario Liberal Leadership Candidate, MPP, St. Paul's.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.